The red rocks of Arizona Territory stood like ancient sentinels against the merciless August sun, their shadows offering no refuge from the heat that pressed down upon the earth like an iron. Travis McLean squinted against the glare as he guided his horse along the narrow trail that wound between the towering formations, each step kicking up small clouds of rust-colored dust that clung to everything it touched. His cabin sat nestled in a natural hollow between two massive sandstone walls, as isolated as a man could make himself without disappearing entirely. That was how Travis preferred it. 5 years he'd lived here. 5 years since he'd left the cavalry. 5 years since he'd sworn off the company of others, especially women. Most especially widows. The scars across his chest pulled tight as he dismounted. A familiar ache that reminded him daily of why he'd chosen this exile. The Comanche ambush had left him with more than just physical marks. It had taught him the price of trust, the cost of believing in a woman's tears and promises. Martha had been a widow then, pretty and desperate, with eyes that promised everything and delivered only betrayal. She'd sent word to the Comanche about the patrol route in exchange for safe passage for herself and her new lover. 12 good men had died that day. Travis had survived only by miracle, if one could call living with such memories a miracle. He was unsaddling his horse when he heard it, the unmistakable creak and rattle of wagon wheels on the rocky path. His jaw tightened. No one came out here by accident. The nearest town, Redemption Creek, lay a full day's ride to the east, and the locals knew better than to venture toward his land. The wagon appeared around the bend, pulled by a tired-looking mare that had seen better days. But it wasn't the horse that made Travis's hand move instinctively toward the Winchester propped against the fence. It was the driver, a woman, young, from what he could tell at this distance. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun beneath a weathered bonnet, and she wore a faded blue dress that had been mended more times than fabric should bear, even from 50 yards away. He could see the determined set of her shoulders, the way she'd held the reins with hands that knew work. "That's far enough," Travis called out when the wagon drew within speaking distance. His voice came out rougher than intended, scraped raw by disuse and the dry desert air. The woman pulled the mare to a stop but didn't flinch at his harsh tone. Up close, he could see her face clearly now, perhaps 25 years, with high cheekbones and green eyes that held a weariness beyond her years. Beautiful, despite the dust and fatigue, or perhaps because of it. The kind of beauty that came from surviving things that should have broken a person. "Mr. McLean?" Her voice was steady, though he caught the slight tremor beneath it. "I'm Margaret Rourke, Maggie. I heard in town you might need help with your ranch." Travis's expression hardened. "You heard wrong. I don't need help, especially not from—" He bit off the words, but she seemed to understand what he'd left unsaid. "From a widow." She lifted her chin slightly. "Yes, I know what the people in Redemption Creek say about you, that you hate my kind, that you'd rather let your ranch fall to ruin than accept help from a woman whose husband is dead. Then why are you here? Because I need work, Mr. McLean, and despite what you might think of widows, I'm a hard worker. I can cook, clean, mend, tend animals. I grew up on a ranch before—" She stopped, swallowed. "Before I married." The answer is no. Travis turned away, leading his horse toward the small corral. "Turn that wagon around and head back to town." But she didn't move. When he glanced back, she was still sitting there, hands folded in her lap, studying him with those green eyes that seemed to see too much. "They won't give me work in town," she said quietly. "My husband, he wasn't a good man. When he died, people blamed me, said I must have driven him to it. The saloon, the hotel, the general store, none of them will hire Sam Rourke's widow." Sam Rourke. Travis knew the name. A gambler who'd lost more than he'd ever won, who'd drunk himself into debt and early grave, the kind of man who'd likely taken his frustrations out on whatever was closest, usually his wife. "That's not my problem." But even as he said it, Travis found his gaze drawn to her wrists, where the sleeves of her dress had pulled back. The fading yellow-green of old bruises marked her skin like watercolors. "No," she agreed. "It's not, but I'm not asking for charity. Mr. McLean, I'm asking for a chance to earn my keep. 1 month. If you're not satisfied with my work, I'll leave without argument." I said no. I can pay rent. She reached into a small purse beside her on the wagon seat. "I have a little money saved. Enough for— I don't want your money." "Then what do you want?" For the first time, frustration crept into her voice. "To be left alone? Fine. I'll stay out of your way. You won't even know I'm here except for the meals and the clean clothes and the horses being properly tended. I'm not here to seduce you or steal from you or whatever it is you think widows do. I just need somewhere to stay until I can save enough to move on." Thunder rumbled in the distance, drawing both their attention to the western horizon. What had been a clear sky an hour ago now showed a wall of red-brown clouds advancing like an army. A dust storm. And, from the looks of it, a bad one. Travis cursed under his breath. The storms could last hours or days, and no one with sense tried to travel through them. The woman, Maggie, was watching the approaching storm with a resignation that said she'd faced worse. "There's a lean-to behind the cabin," he said grudgingly. "You can put your wagon there. The mare can go in the corral." "Does this mean—" "It means you can wait out the storm. Nothing more." She nodded, gathering the reins. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet." By the time they'd secured the wagon and seen to the mare, the wind was picking up, sending small devils of dust spinning across the yard. Travis led the way to the cabin, acutely aware of the woman following him. It had been 3 years since anyone besides himself had crossed this threshold. The space suddenly felt smaller, more confined. The cabin was simple. One main room with a stone fireplace, a rough wooden table with 2 chairs, shelves along one wall holding supplies. A ladder led to a small loft where he slept. Everything functional, nothing comfortable, a place to exist, not to live. Maggie set her carpetbag by the door and surveyed the room without comment. If she found it lacking, she didn't show it. Instead, she moved to the window, watching as the storm approached with frightening speed. "How long do these usually last?" she asked. "Few hours, sometimes days." She nodded, then turned from the window. "Have you eaten today?" The question caught him off guard. "What?" "Supper. Have you eaten?" When he didn't answer immediately, she moved toward the shelves, examining his supplies with a practical eye. "Beans, salt pork, flour. I can make biscuits if you have lard. Looks like you have some preserved vegetables. I don't need— When did you last have a proper meal, Mr. McLean?" She turned to face him, hands on her hips. Not jerky and cold beans, but actual food. He couldn't remember, which was answer enough. "Sit," she said, pointing to one of the chairs. "I'll cook. Consider it payment for the shelter." Travis wanted to argue, but the wind was howling now, rattling the windows. And there was something oddly comforting about watching someone move purposefully around his kitchen. She worked efficiently, without fuss. And soon the cabin filled with smells he'd forgotten. Baking biscuits, simmering beans with salt pork, coffee brewing on the stove. They ate in relative silence as the storm raged outside. The windows had gone dark with dust, and the wind screamed like a living thing. But inside, with the lamplight and the warm food, it felt almost peaceful. Dangerous, that feeling. Travis pushed it away. "Your husband," he said abruptly. "How long?" She paused, fork halfway to her mouth. 6 months. "How?" "The bottle, mostly. His liver gave out." She set down her fork. "Though if you believe the gossips in town, I poisoned him, or drove him to suicide, or took a lover who killed him. The stories vary depending on who's telling them." "Did you?" Most women would have been offended by the blunt question. Maggie just looked tired. "No, Sam managed to kill himself without any help from me. I tried to save him. Actually, tried to get him to stop drinking, stop gambling. He showed his gratitude with his fists." The matter-of-fact way she said it made something twist in Travis's chest. He pushed the feeling away, Her troubles weren't his concern. "I'm sorry," he found himself saying anyway. "Why? You didn't know him?" She stood, beginning to clear the dishes. "Though, from what I hear, you have your own reasons for distrusting widows." Travis's hand stilled on his coffee cup. "What did you hear?" "Not much. Just that a widow wronged you once, badly enough that you came out here to get away from the world." She pumped water into the basin, her back to him. Must have been some woman to drive a man to this kind of solitude. She was... The words came out before he could stop them. "Beautiful. Desperate. Convinced me she loved me. Convinced me to change the patrol route to avoid her homestead. Said she was afraid of Indian attacks." He laughed bitterly. "Turns out she was meeting her lover there. Sold the information about our movements to the Comanche for safe passage west." Maggie's hands had stilled in the dishwater. "How many died?" 12. Should have been 13, but apparently the devil wasn't ready for me yet." She turned then, soap suds still clinging to her hands. "Is that where—" She gestured vaguely toward his chest. "Among other places." He stood abruptly. "The loft is yours for the night. I'll sleep down here. Mr. McLean, the storm should pass by morning. You'll leave then." She dried her hands slowly, studying him. "You know, not all widows are the same, just like not all soldiers are heroes and not all husbands are good men. Maybe not, but I'm not willing to find out which kind you are." Something flashed in her eyes. Hurt, maybe, or anger. But she simply nodded. "Of course. Thank you for the meal and the shelter." She gathered her carpet bag and climbed the ladder to the loft. Travis sat by the dying fire, listening to the storm and the soft movements above. He'd been alone for so long, he'd forgotten what it was like to share space with another person, to hear breathing that wasn't his own, dangerous. He thought again. Come morning, she'd be gone, and he could return to his solitude. It was better that way, safer. But as the wind howled and the cabin creaked, Travis found himself remembering the bruises on her wrists, the quiet dignity in her voice, the way she'd moved around his kitchen like she belonged there. He shook his head, forcing the thoughts away. She was a widow. That was all he needed to know, all he would let himself know. Come morning, Margaret Rourke would be just another dust devil, spinning away across the desert, leaving nothing behind but the memory of her passing. At least, that's what he told himself as the storm raged on. The storm did not break with the dawn as Travis had hoped. Instead, he woke to the same howling darkness, the windows still black with driven dust, the walls creaking under the relentless assault of wind. He'd slept fitfully in the chair by the cold fireplace, his back protesting the uncomfortable position. A soft footfall on the ladder made him look up. Maggie descended carefully, her hair loose around her shoulders, wearing the same faded dress from yesterday. In the dim lamplight, she looked younger, more vulnerable. Travis quickly looked away. Still storming? She observed unnecessarily, moving to peer out the window at the swirling darkness beyond. Seems so. An awkward silence stretched between them. In the light of day, or what should have been day, the forced intimacy of sharing his small cabin felt even more pronounced. Travis could hear every rustle of her skirts, every soft breath. I'll make coffee, she said finally, moving toward the stove. You don't need to... Mr. McLean. She turned to face him, a slight smile playing at her lips. We're trapped here together for who knows how long. You can either let me be useful, or we can sit here in uncomfortable silence, pretending the other doesn't exist. Which would you prefer? Despite himself, Travis felt the corner of his mouth twitch. Coffee would be good. As she worked, he found himself watching her hands. They were work-roughened but graceful, moving with the easy confidence of someone who'd spent years making do with little. When she reached for the coffee pot on the high shelf, her sleeve pulled back again, revealing not just the fading bruises he'd noticed yesterday, but older scars, thin white lines that spoke of different kinds of violence. She caught him looking and quickly pulled her sleeve down. Sam liked his knives when he was drinking, she said quietly. Said they helped him think clearly. You didn't have to stay with him. The look she gave him was old beyond her years. Where exactly should I have gone? Mr. McLean. A woman alone with no money, no family, no references. At least with Sam, I had a roof over my head. Most days. Anyway. Travis wanted to argue, to point out that anything would have been better than staying with a man who hurt her. But he remembered Martha's tears, her stories of hardship and desperation that had all been lies. How could he trust anything this woman said? Here. She set a cup of coffee in front of him, strong and black the way he liked it. How had she known? They sat across from each other at the small table, the storm a constant presence around them. After a while, Maggie produced some mending from her carpet bag, his shirts. He realized with a start. She must have noticed the tears and missing buttons yesterday. You don't have to do that, he said. I like keeping my hands busy. She threaded a needle with easy precision. Besides, you're giving me shelter. Let me at least earn it. They lapsed into silence again, but it was less strained now. Travis found himself oddly mesmerized by the steady movement of her hands, the careful, tiny stitches that would hold far better than his own clumsy attempts at repair. Tell me about your ranch, she said after a while. How many head of cattle? About 50. Few horses. It's not much, but it's enough. For one person, maybe. Must be hard, managing it all alone. He shrugged. I manage. When was the last time you went to town? 2 months ago? Maybe 3. She looked up from her sewing. That's a long time between supply runs. I don't need much. Everyone needs something. Mr. McLean. She bit off a thread, set aside the finished shirt, and picked up another. Even hermits. I'm not a hermit. No. What would you call a man who lives alone in the desert, avoiding all human contact? Careful. She almost smiled at that. My husband called me many things, Mr. McLean, but never careful. The wind picked up even more, if that were possible, rattling the windows in their frames. Dust sifted through tiny cracks, settling on every surface despite the rags Travis had stuffed around the edges. Does it often last this long? Maggie asked, eyeing the darkness beyond the glass. Sometimes. Longest I've seen was 4 days. She paled slightly. 4 days? Don't worry, I won't make you stay that long. Soon as it breaks enough to travel safely, you can go. And if it doesn't break, he didn't answer. The thought of being trapped here with her for days made something twist in his chest, not entirely unpleasant. Which was the problem? By afternoon, or what he guessed was afternoon, the lamp was burning low. Travis refilled it from his precious supply of oil, aware they'd need to ration if the storm continued. Maggie had found his small collection of books, dog-eared copies of Shakespeare and Dickens that he'd read so many times he could recite passages from memory. You read, she said, sounding surprised. Did you think I couldn't? No, I just... She ran her fingers over the worn spine of David Copperfield. Sam never liked books, said they put ideas in women's heads. And did they? Yes. She looked up at him, a spark of defiance in her green eyes. Terrible ideas, like thinking I deserve better than being someone's punching bag. Travis didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. She selected Hamlet and curled up in the chair by the fire to read. He tried not to watch her, tried not to notice how the lamplight caught the auburn highlights in her dark hair, how she bit her lower lip when concentrating. Dinner was a simple affair. More beans, though she managed to make them taste better than his usual attempts. They ate in companionable silence, the storm still raging beyond the walls. It was almost possible to pretend this was normal, that sharing a meal with someone was something he did every day. Dangerous thinking. After dinner, Maggie insisted on cleaning up despite his protests. As she worked, she hummed softly under her breath. A hymn, he thought, though he couldn't place it. The domestic scene was so at odds with his usual solitary existence that it made him restless. Why did you really come here? He asked abruptly. She paused in her washing. I told you, I needed work. There are other ranches, other towns, none that would hire Sam Rourke's widow. She resumed scrubbing a plate with perhaps more force than necessary. Word travels fast in the territory. Faster when it's gossip about a woman who must have done something to deserve her fate. Did you? She turned to face him, soap suds dripping from her hands. Did I what? Deserve to be beaten? Deserve to be used as payment for gambling debts? Deserve to lose the baby I was carrying because Sam decided I'd been looking at another man? The words hung in the air between them. Travis felt as if he'd been punched. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I didn't know. Of course you didn't. She turned back to the dishes. It's easier to hate all widows when you don't know their stories, when you can paint us all with the same brush as the one who wronged you. Martha killed 12 men, and Sam killed my child. Her voice was steady, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. Does that make us even? Do all widows now carry the weight of both crimes? Travis stood abruptly, needing distance, needing air, but there was nowhere to go. The storm had turned his refuge into a cage. I was 20 when I married him, Maggie continued, as if compelled to tell the story now that she'd started. My parents had died of fever, and Sam seemed kind. Charming. He promised to take care of me. She laughed bitterly. For 6 months, he did. Then the drinking got worse. The gambling started, and I learned what kind of man I'd bound myself to. Why didn't you leave? She dried her hands slowly, deliberately. Where would I go? I had no money. Sam drank or gambled away everything. No family, no friends. Sam made sure of that. And the law? She shook her head. The law says a husband can discipline his wife however he sees fit. That's not discipline. That's the world we live in. Mr. McLean. She finally turned to face him again. I survived it for 5 years. I would have survived it longer if his liver hadn't given out. So yes, I'm a widow. Yes, my husband is dead. But I didn't betray anyone. I didn't get anyone killed. I just survived. The wind howled around the cabin, echoing the turmoil in Travis's chest. Every instinct told him not to trust her, not to believe her stories. But there was something in her eyes, not the calculated tears Martha had used, but a bone-deep weariness that couldn't be faked. The baby, he said roughly. When? 3 years ago. I was 4 months along. Her hand moved unconsciously to her stomach. Sam had lost badly at cards, came home drunk and angry, said I'd been making eyes at the man who'd won. She took a shaky breath. I lost the baby that night, nearly died myself. The doctor said I probably couldn't, that there wouldn't be any others. Travis felt something crack inside his chest. Maggie, don't. She held up a hand. I don't want your pity, Mr. McLean. I just want you to understand that not all of us chose to be widows. Some of us are just trying to find a way forward. She climbed the ladder to the loft without another word, leaving Travis alone with the dying fire and his tumultuous thoughts. He sat for a long time, listening to the storm and the soft sounds of her moving above. Martha had cried prettily, had told her tales of woe with calculated effect, but she'd never looked the way Maggie had looked, like someone who'd survived a war and wasn't sure the peace was worth the price. When he finally banked the fire and settled into his uncomfortable chair, Travis found himself thinking about those scars on her arms, the casual way she'd mentioned payment for gambling debts, the unconscious gesture toward a child who'd never been born. The storm raged on, trapping them together in his small cabin. But it was the storm inside Travis that kept him awake, the unwelcome realization that, perhaps, just perhaps, he'd been wrong to paint all widows with the same bitter brush. The storm finally broke on the 3rd morning, leaving behind a world scoured clean and painted in shades of rust and gold. Travis stood on the porch, breathing in the rain-washed air, watching the sun paint the red rocks in brilliant hues. Behind him, he could hear Maggie moving about the cabin, the domestic sounds that had become strangely familiar over the past 2 days. I'll be going then, she said from the doorway. He turned to find her dressed for travel, her carpet bag in hand, bonnet already tied beneath her chin. Something twisted in his chest at the sight. Where? She shrugged. West, maybe California. Somewhere people don't know Sam Rourke's name. That's a long journey for a woman alone. I've managed worse. They stood there awkwardly, neither quite meeting the other's eyes. The past 2 days had created an odd intimacy between them. Not romantic, exactly, but something that made her leaving feel like a loss Travis hadn't expected. Stay! The word escaped before he could stop it. Maggie's eyes widened slightly. Mr. McLean, 1 month, like you said. He cleared his throat, trying to sound practical. The ranch does need help, and you need time to save money for California. She studied him for a long moment. You're sure? No, he wasn't sure. Having her here was dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with betrayal and everything to do with the way she hummed while she worked, the way she'd made his cold cabin feel warm. But he heard himself saying, "The barn needs cleaning, horses need tending, and I'm tired of my own cooking." A smile played at the corners of her mouth. Such flattery. I'm not a man for pretty words. Mrs. Rourke. No, she agreed. You're not, and it's Miss Rourke, or just Maggie. I don't want to carry Sam's name any more than necessary. Maggie, then. She set down her carpet bag. I'll need quarters. I won't share your cabin indefinitely. There's a tack room in the barn. It's rough, but it's got a stove and a cot. I can help you clean it out. I've slept in worse. And Travis believed her. They spent the morning making the tack room habitable. It was small, but sturdy, with thick walls that would keep out the worst of the heat and cold. Maggie attacked the accumulated dust and debris with determined efficiency, while Travis repaired the stovepipe and reinforced the door. This will do nicely, she said when they'd finished, surveying the clean space with satisfaction. Better than most places I've lived. Actually, Travis wanted to ask about those places, but didn't. Instead, he showed her around the ranch. The well, the vegetable garden he'd let go to seed, the chicken coop that stood empty, the corral where his few horses dozed in the morning sun. You could have a nice operation here, Maggie observed, leaning against the corral fence. With proper management, I manage fine. You survive. There's a difference. Over the following days, that difference became increasingly apparent. Maggie threw herself into the work with an energy that made Travis realize how much he'd let slide. She repaired the chicken coop and somehow produced 6 laying hens from a trade with a passing wagon. The vegetable garden began showing signs of life under her care. The horses' coats gleamed from proper grooming. But it was the smaller changes that unsettled Travis most. The way she'd leave coffee warming on the stove when she saw him heading out for morning chores. How his shirts appeared mended and clean without him asking. The wildflowers she'd placed in a jar on the kitchen table, bringing color to the drab space. He found himself looking forward to their evening meals, to her stories about growing up on her parents' ranch before the fever took them. She had a dry wit that caught him off guard, making him smile despite himself. You should smile more often, she told him one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the rocks. It makes you look less like you're planning to shoot someone. Maybe I am planning to shoot someone. Me? Not currently. Well, that's encouraging. 2 weeks into their arrangement, Travis returned from checking the cattle to find her struggling with a hay bale twice her size. Without thinking, he moved to help, his hands covering hers on the rope. She froze at the contact, and he quickly stepped back. I can manage, she said, but her voice was slightly breathless. I know you can, but you don't have to. They moved the hay together in silence, but Travis was acutely aware of every accidental brush of shoulders, every shared grip on the rope. It had been so long since he'd worked alongside someone, since he'd felt like part of something larger than his own solitude. That evening, trouble arrived in the form of Jake Morrison, a drunk from town who'd heard about the widow living at Travis's place. Travis was in the barn when he heard Maggie's sharp voice from the yard. I said, "Good day, Mr. Morrison." "Aw, come on now. Pretty thing, just being neighborly. Heard McLean took in Sam's widow. Figured you might be lonely out here." Travis emerged from the barn to find Morrison crowding Maggie against the porch rail. his intentions clear in his bloodshot eyes and wandering hands. "Step away from her." Travis's voice was deadly quiet. Morrison turned, swaying slightly. "Well, if it ain't the hermit himself, shouldn't keep something this pretty all to yourself. McLean," Sam used to share when he lost bad enough. He never finished the sentence. Travis's fist connected with his jaw, sending him sprawling in the dust. But Morrison was drunk enough to be stupid, scrambling up with a curse and charging. The fight was brutal but brief. Travis had learned to fight in the cavalry, where pretty didn't matter nearly as much as effective. When Morrison finally stayed down, nose streaming blood, Travis hauled him to his feet by his collar. "You come near my property again, I'll kill you. You speak her name in town, I'll kill you. You so much as look at her if you pass on the road, I'll kill you. Understood?" Morrison nodded frantically, stumbling to his horse when Travis released him. They watched him ride away, weaving dangerously in the saddle. "You didn't have to," Maggie began. "Yes, I did." Travis flexed his bruised knuckles, avoiding her gaze. "What he said about Sam sharing, it's true." Her voice was flat. "When the debts got bad enough, said it was that or lose the house." She wrapped her arms around herself. "Another reason the good people of Redemption Creek think I'm no better than I should be." The rage that filled Travis then was different from the cold anger he'd felt at Morrison. This was hot, burning, directed at a dead man who'd had everything and valued none of it. "Maggie, I need to start dinner." She turned away, but not before he saw the tears she was fighting. He let her go, knowing she needed the solitude to compose herself. But that night, he found himself pacing the yard like a restless wolf, keeping watch. The thought of what she'd endured, what she'd survived, made him want to dig up Sam Rourke and kill him all over again. He was still pacing when Maggie emerged from the barn, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the night chill. "Can't sleep either?" she asked. "Just checking the property." Liar. But she said it gently. "I'm all right. You know, I've dealt with worse than Jake Morrison. You shouldn't have to deal with any of it." She moved to stand beside him, looking up at the star-filled sky. "Thank you for what you did today. Any man would have—" "No." She turned to face him. "They wouldn't. They didn't. For 5 years, people in town knew what Sam was doing to me. Not one of them ever raised a hand to help. You've known me 2 weeks, and you fought for me. So thank you." Without warning, she rose on her toes and pressed her lips to the scar that ran along his jaw. It was barely a kiss, more a breath against his skin, but Travis felt it like a lightning strike. She was already stepping back, heading for the barn. "Good night, Travis." It was the first time she'd used his given name. He stood frozen, watching her disappear into the darkness, his skin still burning where she'd touched him. That night, he lay awake thinking about the trust in her eyes when she'd looked at him, the gentle pressure of her lips against his scar. Martha had kissed him too, had whispered sweet promises in the dark, but this felt different. Maggie asked for nothing, expected nothing. She simply gave, her work, her stories, her quiet companionship. And now this gentle acknowledgement of what he'd done. Dangerous, he thought again, but the word was losing its power to protect him. Each day she stayed, each small kindness she offered, each glimpse of the strength beneath her gentle exterior, wore away at the walls he'd built. Tomorrow he would re-establish boundaries, remind himself why he'd sworn off women, especially widows. Tomorrow he would be cold and distant again. But tonight, with his jaw still tingling from her kiss and the memory of her saying his name, Travis allowed himself to imagine what it might be like to not be alone, to have someone to share the work and the silence, the sunsets and the storms. Just for tonight, he told himself. Tomorrow. He would remember why this couldn't last. Tomorrow. The rains came unexpectedly in the 3rd week, a rare blessing in the desert that turned the red earth dark and filled the air with the scent of sage and creosote. Travis and Maggie had spent the day moving the cattle to higher ground, working in companionable rhythm that had developed over the weeks. By the time they returned to the ranch, They were both soaked through. "Get inside and change," Travis ordered, seeing how she shivered in her wet clothes. "I'll see to the horses." "I can help." "Maggie." He used the tone that brooked no argument. "Go." She went, but not before giving him a look that said she'd do as she pleased once she was dry. Travis smiled despite himself. In 3 weeks. He'd learned that Maggie Rourke had a spine of steel beneath her gentle manner. By the time he'd rubbed down the horses and secured the barn, the rain had become a steady downpour. He ran for the cabin, water streaming from his hat, and burst through the door to find Maggie by the fire, wrapped in a blanket, her hair loose and drying around her shoulders. "There's coffee," she said without turning. "And I laid out dry clothes for you." He looked to see his clean shirt and pants folded on his chair, still warm from being held near the fire. Such a simple gesture, but it made something tighten in his chest. "Thank you. Go change before you catch your death." He climbed to the loft. She'd insisted they switch after that first week, claiming the tack room was perfectly adequate, but his back wouldn't survive many more nights in that chair. When he came back down, she'd poured 2 cups of coffee and set them on the small table. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the rain drum against the roof. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Maggie had changed into a simple brown dress, her everyday work clothes, but with her hair down and the firelight playing across her features. She looked beautiful. The word came unbidden, and Travis quickly looked away. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked. "Not worth that much." "Liar." She smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "You've been strange all week. Ever since Morrison." "I'm always strange." "Stranger than usual, then." She studied him over her coffee cup. "Are you regretting letting me stay?" "No." The answer came quick and honest. "No, I'm not." Then what? He couldn't tell her the truth, that every day made it harder to remember why he'd wanted to be alone, that he caught himself watching for her smile, listening for her humming, planning his day around their shared meals, that she was breaking down walls he'd spent 5 years building, and he didn't know how to stop her. "Travis?" "It's nothing." She set down her cup and moved around the table to stand before him. "Look at me." He did, reluctantly, and found her green eyes full of understanding. "I know what it's like to be afraid," she said softly. "To think that letting someone close means giving them power to hurt you. But I'm not her, Travis. I'm not Martha." "I know that." "Do you?" Before he could respond, she reached out and unbuttoned the top of his shirt, pushing the fabric aside to reveal the massive scars across his chest. His breath caught, but he didn't stop her as she traced the raised lines with gentle fingers. 12 men died, she murmured. "But you survived. These scars, they're not marks of failure. They're proof of strength. Maggie." "Shh." She leaned forward and pressed her lips to the worst of the scars, the one that ran closest to his heart. "Every one of these deserves to be honored, not hidden." Travis shuddered, his hands coming up to grip her arms. "Don't." "Why?" She looked up at him, her face inches from his. "Because you might feel something? Because you might remember you're human? Because I might want things I can't have. Who says you can't have them?" The question hung between them, charged with possibility. Travis could feel her warmth, smell the lavender soap she used, see the pulse fluttering at her throat. It would be so easy to pull her close, to give in to what had been building between them for weeks. Instead, he gently pushed her away. "You don't know what you're asking." "I'm not asking for anything." She stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself. "I'm offering—" "There's a difference." "Maggie, please." "I should check on the animals." She grabbed her shawl and headed for the door. "It's pouring rain." "I've been wet before." She was gone before he could stop her, leaving Travis alone with the fire and his churning thoughts. He paced the small cabin, torn between going after her and maintaining the distance that kept them both safe. The door burst open 10 minutes later. Maggie stood there drenched again, her hair plastered to her head, her dress clinging to every curve. She was shivering and crying and looking at him with eyes full of hurt and determination. "You want to know why I came back?" she said through chattering teeth. "Not to check the animals. They're fine. I came back because I'm tired of being careful, tired of being afraid. Sam made me afraid of everything, of speaking, of laughing, of wanting. You made me remember what it's like to not be afraid. And now you're pushing me away because you're scared too. Maggie, no, let me finish." She moved toward him, leaving puddles with every step. "I know you think all widows are manipulative, that we're all Martha, using men for our own ends, but did you ever think that maybe she was just as desperate as she claimed? That maybe she made terrible choices because she didn't see any good ones? That maybe she got 12 men killed, and she's dead too, isn't she? Whatever her reasons, whatever her choices, she paid for them. How long are you going to make every other woman pay too?" Travis grabbed a blanket and wrapped it around her shoulders, trying to stop her shivering. "You're going to catch pneumonia. I don't care." "Well, I do." The words echoed in the sudden silence. They stared at each other, both breathing hard. "Why?" Maggie asked softly. "Why do you care?" Travis turned away, running his hands through his hair. "You know why? Say it." "No." "Travis, please." "Because I'm falling in love with you." The words tore out of him, raw and desperate. "Are you happy now? I swore I'd never. I promised myself. But every day you're here, every smile, every touch, every damn cup of coffee you leave warming for me breaks down another piece of what's keeping me safe. Is that what you wanted to hear?" She was crying harder now, but smiling through the tears. "Yes." "Maggie." She silenced him by pressing her fingers to his lips. "I'm not asking for promises. I'm not asking for forever. I'm just asking for tonight, for honesty, for you to stop fighting so hard against something that could be good." Travis caught her hand, pressing it against his chest where his heart hammered against his ribs. "I don't know how to do this anymore." "Neither do I." She stepped closer, the blanket falling away. "Maybe we can learn together." This time, when she reached for him, he didn't pull away. Their lips met in a kiss that was nothing like the gentle press of lips to his scar weeks ago. This was desperate, hungry, full of weeks of denied want and years of loneliness finally breaking. Travis backed her against the wall, his hands tangling in her wet hair. She made a soft sound against his mouth that nearly undid him, her fingers working at the buttons of his shirt with trembling urgency. "Maggie," he breathed against her throat. "We should." "No more should," she interrupted, pulling his head back down to hers. "No more careful, just this." They made their way to the blankets by the fire, leaving a trail of wet clothes behind them. In the firelight, the scars on both their bodies told stories of survival, of pain endured and overcome. Travis kissed each mark on her skin with the same reverence she'd shown his, until she was gasping his name like a prayer. When they came together, it was with a desperate tenderness that spoke of two damaged souls finding solace in each other. Maggie's nails dug into his shoulders as she arched beneath him, and Travis buried his face in her neck, overwhelmed by the feeling of being connected to another person after so long alone. Afterward, they lay entwined on the floor, the blanket pulled over their cooling bodies. Maggie traced lazy patterns on his chest while Travis played with her drying hair. "I'm still leaving in a week," she said quietly. Reality crashed back like cold water. "What? You said 1 month. It's been 3 weeks. Travis tightened his arms around her. "Stay. You don't mean that. Tomorrow, in the daylight, you'll remember all the reasons this was a mistake. You'll pull away, go cold, shut me out, and I can't." Her voice broke. "I can't go through that. Not again. Maggie, I've had enough rejection for one lifetime." "Travis." She sat up, reaching for her discarded shift. "At least this way, I can leave with one perfect night to remember." He watched her dress with efficient movements, his chest feeling hollow. She was right, of course. Come morning, the fears would return, the doubts would creep back in. He'd hurt her trying to protect himself, just as Sam had hurt her trying to own her. "Where will you go?" he asked as she headed for the door. "Does it matter?" "Yes." She paused at the threshold, not looking back. "California. Like I said, somewhere I can start over. Again." "Maggie, wait." But she was gone, running through the rain to her quarters in the barn, leaving Travis alone with the dying fire and the scent of lavender on his skin. He sat there until dawn, watching the embers fade, trying to convince himself this was for the best. In a week she'd be gone, and he could return to his solitude, safe, protected, alone. The word had never sounded more like a punishment. The following days were agony. True to Maggie's prediction, Travis had retreated into cold distance, avoiding her whenever possible. They moved around each other like strangers, speaking only when necessary about ranch business. The easy companionship of the past weeks had vanished, replaced by a tension that made the air itself feel heavy. Maggie threw herself into preparing for her departure. She mended every piece of clothing Travis owned, cleaned the cabin until it shone, and filled the pantry with preserves that would last months. All the while, she kept her face carefully neutral, though Travis sometimes caught her wiping her eyes when she thought he wasn't looking. On her last morning, Travis found her loading her meager possessions into the wagon she'd arrived in. The sight hit him like a physical blow. "Let me help," he offered. "I can manage." Her voice was polite, distant. The warmth that had always colored her words when she spoke to him was gone. "Maggie, Your shirts are hanging in the cabin. The blue one needs a button replaced, but I ran out of time. There's stew on the stove that should last you a few days. The hens are laying well now. Collect the eggs daily or they'll start hiding them. I've written down the recipe for those biscuits you like." "Stop." He caught her arm as she reached for another bundle. "Just stop." She looked at his hand on her arm, then up at his face. "What do you want from me, Travis?" "I don't know." The admission tore out of him. I don't want you to go like this." "Like what? Like a woman who made a fool of herself over a man who can't decide what he wants?" She pulled free of his grip. "I've been down that road before. At least Sam was consistent in his cruelty." The comparison stung. "I'm nothing like Sam." "No," she agreed. "Sam hurt my body. You're hurting my heart." "I'm not sure which is worse." Travis watched helplessly as she finished loading the wagon. When she climbed up to the seat and took the reins, panic seized him. "Where exactly are you heading?" "Carson City first. Then maybe Sacramento." "You have enough money. I have what you paid me. It'll do." "Maggie, goodbye." "Travis." She didn't look at him as she snapped the reins, urging the old mare into motion. Travis stood in the yard, watching until the wagon disappeared around the bend. The silence that descended was immediate and complete. This was what he'd wanted, wasn't it? His solitude back, his life uncomplicated by another person's presence. He lasted 3 hours. 3 hours of pacing the too-quiet cabin, of seeing her touch everywhere, the wildflowers wilting in their jar, the mended shirts hanging neatly, the recipe written in her careful hand. 3 hours of remembering her laugh, her tears, the way she'd felt in his arms that night by the fire. 3 hours before young Tom Bradley came racing up on his pony, eyes wide with fear. "Mr. McLean! Mr. McLean!" Travis was already moving, some instinct telling him what the boy would say before he said it. "It's the widow, sir." "That Rourke woman. She's in trouble." "Where?" "About 5 miles west, near Skeleton Ridge. Jake Morrison and his brothers, they were waiting for her. Pulled her from the wagon. They're saying she needs to be taught what happens to women who think they're too good for regular folk." Travis was already saddling his fastest horse, his hands steady despite the rage burning through him. He strapped on his gun belt, checked his rifle. "Tom, ride to town. Get the sheriff." "Sheriff's gone to Tucson. Mr. McLean won't be back for days." Of course he was. Travis swung into the saddle. "Then get anyone who'll come. Tell them Travis McLean is calling in any debts owed." The boy nodded and raced off. Travis turned his horse west and rode like the devil himself was chasing him. He heard them before he saw them, rough laughter and Maggie's voice, steady despite everything. telling them they'd regret this. The wagon sat abandoned on the trail, the mare grazing peacefully nearby. But it was the scene beyond that made Travis's blood turn to ice. They had her backed against a large boulder. Her dress was torn at the shoulder. Her hair had come loose, and a bruise was already forming on her cheek. But she stood straight, chin raised, facing down 4 men with more courage than most soldiers Travis had known. Jake Morrison was closest to her, still sporting the broken nose from their last encounter. His brothers, Pete and Carl, flanked him. The 4th man Travis didn't recognize, some drifter looking for trouble. "Nothing to regret, sweetheart," Jake was saying. "Just teaching you your place. Sam should have done a better job of it. But don't worry, we'll finish what he started." "Touch her and die." Travis's voice cut through their laughter like a blade. 4 heads turned to find him sitting his horse 20 feet away, rifle already in hand. "McLean." Jake's face went pale beneath the dirt. "This ain't your business no more. She's leaving, ain't she? That makes her fair game. She's under my protection, always will be. That makes her my business." 4 against 1. "Hermit," Pete Morrison said, hand moving toward his gun. "You ain't that fast." Travis smiled coldly. "Try me." For a moment, nobody moved. Then Jake made the mistake of grabbing for Maggie, probably thinking to use her as a shield. Travis shot him in the shoulder before he could touch her, the sound echoing off the rocks. Jake went down screaming. His brothers went for their guns, but Travis was already moving, using his horse as cover. 2 more shots, and Pete was clutching a bleeding hand while Carl was on the ground holding his knee. The drifter threw up his hands. "I ain't dying for this. Smart man. Get him out of here. Now." As the drifter helped the wounded Morrison brothers onto their horses, Travis kept his rifle trained on them. Only when they were riding away. Jake slumped over his saddle. Did he dismount and turn to Maggie? She was standing perfectly still, arms wrapped around herself, trembling slightly, when she saw his face. Something in her expression crumbled. "You came," she whispered. "Of course I came." He reached for her, and she fell into his arms, finally allowing herself to shake. "Are you hurt? Did they—" "No, you got here in time." She pulled back to look at him. "How did you know?" "Tom Bradley saw them take you. Maggie, I'm so sorry. This is my fault. If I hadn't—" She silenced him by placing her fingers over his lips. "This isn't your fault. It's theirs. It's always been theirs. Sam's, Jake's. Every man who thinks a woman alone is prey. You're not alone." The words came out fierce, desperate. "You'll never be alone again if you'll let me. If you'll stay. Travis, I know I've been a fool. I know I hurt you. But when Tom said you were in trouble, I knew. Nothing else mattered except getting to you. Not my fears, not the past, nothing but you." She searched his face. "And tomorrow, when the fear comes back, then I'll remember today. I'll remember what it felt like thinking I might lose you. I'll remember that being safe isn't worth being without you." Pretty words, Mr. McLean. But you said yourself you're not a man for pretty words. "No," he agreed. "So let me show you instead." He kissed her there on the dusty trail, with her torn dress and his gun still warm from firing, kissed her like a man who'd finally figured out what mattered. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Maggie was crying again. "If I stay." "When you stay. When I stay," she corrected with a watery smile. "Things have to be different. I won't be kept at arm's length. I won't be shut out when you get scared. I've had enough of that for a lifetime. I know. I promise." "No." She placed her hand over his heart. "No promises you might break. Just try every day. Try to let me in a little more. Can you do that?" "I can try." "Then take me home." Home. The word had never sounded so right. Travis helped her onto his horse, swinging up behind her, his arms secure around her waist. They'd come back for the wagon later. Right now, he just needed to get her somewhere safe. Somewhere he could tend her bruises and begin making up for the pain he'd caused. As they rode, Maggie leaned back against his chest. "Travis? Thank you for coming after me." He pressed his lips to her hair. "Always. Maggie, always." The sun was setting by the time they reached the ranch, painting the red rocks in shades of gold and crimson. Travis lifted Maggie down from the horse, but instead of heading inside, she stopped, looking around the yard as if seeing it for the first time. "What is it?" She turned to him with a smile that made his heart skip. "I'm home." "Yes," Travis agreed, pulling her close. "You're home." That night, as he tended her bruises and held her close, Travis understood that sometimes the most dangerous thing wasn't letting someone in. It was keeping them out. Maggie had broken through his defenses not with manipulation or tears, but with quiet strength and stubborn compassion. "No more running," he murmured against her hair as they lay together. "From either of us, no more running," she agreed, pressing closer. Outside, the desert night sang its ancient song, but inside the cabin that had once been a refuge from the world, two wounded souls began the slow work of healing each other. The days following Maggie's return were tentative, like learning to walk after a long illness. Travis found himself watching her constantly, half afraid she might vanish if he looked away. She moved back into the cabin, properly this time, sharing his space and his life without pretense or apology. On the third evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Travis finally found the courage to tell her everything. Her name was Martha Caldwell. He began, staring into the flames. Beautiful woman, widow of a cavalry officer who died of fever. She came to the fort seeking protection, said Comanche raiders had been threatening her homestead. Maggie sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, giving him the space to speak. I was young, eager to play hero. When she cried about being alone and afraid, I believed every word. When she asked me to adjust patrol routes to avoid disturbing her livestock, I did it without question. When she said she loved me, he laughed bitterly. I was fool enough to believe that too. What happened? She was meeting her lover, a trader who dealt with the Comanche, sold them information about our movements in exchange for safe passage west. The patrol I was supposed to lead got ambushed in Skeleton Canyon. 12 men died because I trusted a pretty face and a sad story. And you? Travis pulled open his shirt, revealing the full extent of his scars. 3 bullets, 2 arrow wounds, and a knife that nearly found my heart. Should have died with my men, but a Mexican trader found me 2 days later. Spent 6 months recovering, another 6 months drinking, trying to forget. Then I came here. Maggie rose and knelt before him, her fingers gentle on his scarred chest. You weren't the one who betrayed them. Travis, I was their leader. I was supposed to protect them. You were human. You trusted someone who proved unworthy of that trust. That makes you a good man who was deceived, not a failure. 12 men, Maggie. 12 good men with families. Futures. And how many men have you saved by shutting yourself away here? How many people have you helped by hiding from the world? Her voice was gentle but firm. You've been serving a life sentence for someone else's crime. Travis caught her hands. I swore I'd never trust another woman, especially not another widow. I know. But then you came along with your quiet strength and your stubborn kindness. And suddenly all those walls I'd built seemed like a prison instead of protection. Walls can't tell the difference between keeping danger out and keeping life out, Maggie said softly. I should know. I built plenty of my own. Tell me, Travis urged. All of it. I want to know everything. So she did. She told him about growing up on her parents' small ranch, about the fever that took them when she was 19, about Sam Rourke riding in like salvation. All charm and promises. The drinking started on our wedding night, she said, her voice steady but her eyes distant. He got drunk at the reception, angry that my parents hadn't left more money. That was the first time he hit me. Apologized the next morning, swore it would never happen again. Travis's hands tightened on hers, but he didn't interrupt. It got worse when the gambling started. He'd lose at cards, come home raging. Said it was my fault for not being lucky, for not being pretty enough to distract the other players. When he started losing big, he'd make me... She stopped, swallowed. He'd make me be nice to his creditors. Said it was that or lose the house. Maggie, I got pregnant after 2 years. Thought maybe a baby would change things. Sam was furious. Another mouth to feed. He said, but I was so happy, so careful. Then one night he lost everything to a cattle buyer named Watson. Came home convinced I'd been making eyes at the man. I was 4 months along. Travis pulled her up into his arms as she finally let the tears fall. I woke up in Doc Morrison's office. No relation to Jake. Thank God, the baby was gone. Doc said I'd be lucky if I could ever carry another. Sam never even asked about the baby. Just complained about the doctor's bill. Why didn't you leave then? Where would I go? I had nothing. No family, no money, no friends. Sam made sure of that. And the law. The law says a husband has rights. Even Doc Morrison, kind as he was, said there was nothing to be done unless Sam actually killed me. So you stayed. For 3 more years. Until his liver finally gave out. He died cursing me, saying I'd poisoned him. Half the town believed it. The other half said I'd driven him to drink. Either way, I was the villain. They sat in silence for a while, holding each other. 2 survivors comparing their scars. We're a pair, aren't we? Maggie finally said with a watery laugh. Both of us so damaged. Maybe that's why we fit, Travis suggested. We understand each other's sharp edges. She pulled back to look at him. Is that what we do, fit? You tell me. He cupped her face in his hands. These past days, having you here, it feels right in a way nothing has for years. But I need you to know, I'm trying, but I'm not. I don't know how to be what you need. I don't need you to be anything but yourself. Maggie said, just let me see who that is. Don't shut me out when the fear comes. It will come, he warned. I'll have bad days, nightmares, times when the past seems more real than the present. Then I'll remind you where you are, who you're with. She smiled softly. I have nightmares too, you know. Sometimes I wake up thinking Sam's still alive. Still angry? What helps? Knowing he's not, knowing I survived. And lately, she blushed slightly. Lately, knowing you're here. Travis pulled her close again, marveling at how right she felt in his arms. I'm not going anywhere. Neither am I. They moved together to the bedroom, their bedroom now, as they lay entwined in the darkness. Maggie traced the scars on his chest again, this time knowing their full story. Do they still hurt? She asked. Sometimes, when the weather changes, when the memories get too strong. And now? Now. He caught her hand, pressed it flat against his heart. Now they just remind me I survived, that I'm here with you. She kissed each scar tenderly, the way she had that night by the fire. But this time, Travis didn't pull away. This time, he let himself feel the healing in her touch, the promise that maybe, just maybe, the past didn't have to define the future. Later, as Maggie slept peacefully beside him, Travis lay awake thinking about walls and trust, about the price of safety and the cost of solitude. He'd spent 5 years punishing himself for Martha's betrayal, 5 years letting 12 dead men haunt his every moment. But Maggie was right. How many lives had he failed to touch by hiding away? How much good had he left undone in his determination never to be fooled again? He looked down at the woman in his arms, scarred and strong, gentle and fierce, offering him not redemption, but partnership. 2 damaged souls who could choose to remain broken apart or try to heal together. I love you, he whispered into the darkness, the words feeling rusty from disuse, but true all the same. Maggie stirred, murmured something that might have been his name, and pressed closer. Travis closed his eyes, letting himself rest in the simple miracle of not being alone. Tomorrow would bring its challenges. The Morrison brothers might seek revenge. The town would gossip about the hermit and the widow. The nightmares would come, for both of them, bringing with them all the old fears and doubts. But tonight, in this bed that had known only solitude for so long, two people who'd forgotten how to trust were learning that perhaps the greatest courage wasn't in building walls. It was in having the faith to tear them down. "Thank you," Travis whispered to the sleeping woman beside him, "for coming to his gate that dusty day, for refusing to give up on him, for showing him that not all widows were Martha, and not all pain lasted forever, for reminding him that he was more than his scars." The drought arrived with the heat of late summer, turning the landscape even more unforgiving than usual. The grass withered, the water holes dried up, and Travis watched his small herd grow thinner by the day. He'd survived lean times before, but never with someone else depending on him. "We'll manage," Maggie said one morning, finding him staring at the near-empty water trough. "We always do. This is different. If the well runs dry, then we'll haul water from the creek. It's farther, but it's doable." Travis wanted to share her optimism, but the arithmetic was harsh. 50 head of cattle, 6 horses, and 2 people needed more water than one man could haul. And that was assuming the creek didn't dry up too. The situation worsened when Sheriff Coleman arrived with a man in a city suit who looked as out of place in the desert as a fish in a tree. "Travis," the sheriff said, dismounting. "This is Mr. Bartholomew from the Territorial Land Office." Travis's stomach dropped. He'd been expecting this for years, someone to question his claim, to demand papers he didn't have. "Mr. McLean," Bartholomew said, mopping his face with a handkerchief. "I'm here about your land deed. Filed it proper 5 years ago," Travis said evenly. "Yes, well, there seems to be some irregularity. You filed as a single man, but I understand you now have a woman living here?" Maggie emerged from the cabin, wiping her hands on her apron. "Is there a problem, gentlemen?" Bartholomew's eyes narrowed. "You would be the widow Rourke?" "I'm Maggie Rourke, yes." "Living here unmarried with Mr. McLean? That's none of your business." Travis growled. "Actually, it is." Bartholomew produced a document. "According to territorial law, a land claim can be revoked for moral turpitude. An unmarried woman living with a man certainly qualifies." "That's ridiculous," Maggie said. "I work here. I'm Mr. McLean's housekeeper." "With no other quarters? No chaperone?" Bartholomew smiled unpleasantly. "I think not, unless you can prove you're employed in a legitimate capacity, with wages, records, that sort of thing. I'll have to recommend revocation of the land claim." Travis saw it then, the setup. Someone wanted his land, probably for the water rights, and they'd found a legal way to steal it. "Who put you up to this?" he demanded. "Morrison? Someone from town." "I'm simply doing my job. Mr. McLean, you have 2 weeks to resolve this situation. Either the woman goes, or you provide proof of legitimate employment, or—" He shrugged. "Well, let's hope it doesn't come to that." After they left, Travis slumped against the corral fence. "I should have known. Should have been more careful." "This isn't about being careful," Maggie said fiercely. "This is about someone using the law to steal what you've built." "What we've built," Travis corrected. "And now you're being used against me, just like I always feared." "Then let me go." The words came out steady, but he could see what they cost her. "I'll leave tomorrow. You keep your land." "No." "Travis, be practical. This land is all you have." "No," he repeated, catching her hands. "I spent 5 years on this land alone, and it never felt like home until you arrived. What good is keeping it if I lose you?" "Then what do we do?" Travis was quiet for a moment, then straightened. "We go to town. We talk to Judge Harper. He's a fair man, and he owes me a favor from when I helped drive off those rustlers last year." They hitched up the wagon the next morning, both dressed in their best clothes, which wasn't saying much. The ride to town was tense, both aware of the stares they'd receive, the whispers that would follow. Redemption Creek looked smaller in the harsh light of noon. Its buildings huddled together as if for protection against the vastness of the desert, as expected. Their arrival caused a stir. Curtains twitched, conversation stopped, and more than one person crossed the street to avoid them. Judge Harper's office was above the bank, reached by a narrow staircase that creaked with every step. The judge himself was a thin man with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Travis," he said, rising from behind his desk. "And Mrs. Rourke, I heard you might be coming." "Then you know why we're here." Travis said, "Indeed. Sit, both of you. Would you like some water? Coffee?" "Just answers," Travis said. "Who's behind this?" Harper sighed. "Officially, no one. The complaint came through proper channels. Unofficially." He glanced at the door, then lowered his voice. "Carl Morrison's been talking to some cattle company out of Tucson. They're looking to expand. Need water rights. Your land sits on the best water for 50 miles, so they use Maggie to force me out. It's not personal, Travis, it's business. It's theft," Maggie said quietly. "Using morality laws to steal a man's home." Harper looked uncomfortable. "The law is the law, ma'am. An unmarried woman living with a man. It doesn't look proper." "Then we'll make it proper," Travis said suddenly. "We'll get married." The words hung in the air. Maggie turned to stare at him, eyes wide. "Travis, I mean it." He took her hand, right there in front of the judge. "I was going to ask anyway. Just not like this. Not because someone's forcing us. But if it saves the land and makes us legitimate in the law's eyes—" "It's not that simple," Harper interrupted. "Marriage would solve the moral turpitude issue. Yes, but there's another problem. Mrs. Rourke, your late husband had debts, significant ones. As his widow, you're responsible for them. If you marry Travis, those debts become his—" "How much?" Travis asked. "Nearly $800. The sum was staggering. More than the ranch made in 2 years. "I didn't know," Maggie whispered. "Sam I thought the house covered his debts when it sold." "It covered some, not all." Harper pulled out another document. "Morrison, Carl, not Jake, bought up the remaining notes. If you marry, he can demand immediate payment from Travis. If Travis can't pay, he can force a sale of the land to cover the debt." Travis finished. The trap was elegant in its cruelty. Stay unmarried and lose the land for moral turpitude. Get married and lose it to debt. "There has to be another way," Maggie said desperately. "There is one possibility." Harper said slowly, "If you could prove the debts were incurred fraudulently, that Sam wasn't in his right mind, or that the debts were for illegal purposes." "Gambling debts," Travis said. "Were they for gambling?" "Some, but gambling's not illegal, just foolish." Maggie stood abruptly. "What about the other things? The things Sam made me when he couldn't pay?" She stopped, color draining from her face. Harper leaned forward. "Ma'am, if you have information about illegal activities—" "He sold her," Travis said flatly. "To pay his debts, made her entertain his creditors. That's prostitution. Judge, and forcing your wife into it? That's gotta be illegal." "Can you prove it?" Maggie lifted her chin. "Jake Morrison was one of them. So was Bob Henley from the Double Bar. Carl Morrison knew about it, encouraged it, even said it was good business. Would you testify to this in court?" The question hung heavy. To testify would mean telling everyone, in detail, what she'd endured. The shame she'd carried silently would become public record. "Yes," she said quietly. "If it means Travis keeps his land, yes." Harper was quiet for a long moment. "It would be difficult. Your word against theirs. But," he smiled slightly, "Jake Morrison's already wanted for assault, thanks to your complaint last month. Travis, and I've had my suspicions about Carl's business dealings for some time. This might be the leverage we need. So, what do we do? First, you get married. Today. If possible. That eliminates the moral turpitude claim. Then we petition the court to examine the validity of Sam Rourke's debts, given the circumstances. And with Mrs. Rourke's testimony, we might be able to get them dismissed as products of illegal activity. And if we can't, then you'll need $800 in 2 weeks." Travis and Maggie exchanged looks. It might as well have been 8,000. There's a minister at the church, Harper continued. Reverend Mills. He'll perform the ceremony. I'd suggest you see him immediately. They left the office in a daze. On the street, Maggie stopped. Travis, we don't have to do this. I won't be the reason you lose everything. You're not the reason. You're the solution. He cupped her face in his hands. I meant what I said in there. I was planning to ask you to marry me. Maybe not today, maybe not like this, but soon. A forced marriage to save your land isn't exactly romantic. No, he agreed. But choosing to face whatever comes together, fighting for our home, our life, that sounds like the best reason I can think of. Our home, she repeated softly. Our life. If you'll have me, debts, droughts, Morrisons and all. Instead of answering, she rose on her toes and kissed him. Right there on Main Street, in full view of the scandalized townspeople. Let's go see Reverend Mills, she said when they broke apart. As they walked toward the church, Travis felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Not the naive hope of his youth, but something harder won and more precious. They might lose the ranch. They might face shame and gossip and legal battles, but they'd face it together. 1 year later, the morning sun painted the red rocks in shades of gold and copper as Travis stood on the newly built porch, coffee in hand, watching the ranch come alive. The drought had broken with the winter rains, and now, in late spring, the desert bloomed with unexpected color. You're up early, Maggie said, joining him with her own cup. She wore a simple blue dress that brought out her eyes, her hair still loose from sleep. Wanted to watch the sunrise, Travis said, pulling her close with his free arm. Remember when we used to do this separately? You in the barn, me here. I remember thinking you were the stubbornest, most infuriating man I'd ever met. And now I know you are. She smiled against his shoulder. But you're my stubborn, infuriating man. A year. It had been a year since their hasty wedding in Reverend Mills' small church, with Tom Bradley and Doc Morrison as witnesses. A year since Maggie had stood before Judge Harper and testified about Sam's cruelties, her voice steady even as tears ran down her cheeks. The legal battle had been brutal. Carl Morrison had fought hard, bringing in lawyers from Tucson, trying to paint Maggie as a woman of loose morals who'd driven her husband to destruction. But Jake Morrison, facing assault charges and wanting to deal, had corroborated Maggie's testimony about Sam's illegal activities. So had Bob Henley, after Harper threatened him with conspiracy charges. In the end, the court had dismissed most of Sam's debts as products of criminal enterprise, the few legitimate ones. Travis had managed to pay by selling some cattle and taking on freight hauling for the Army. Riders coming, Travis said, spotting dust on the horizon, but there was no tension in his voice now. The Morrison brothers had left the territory after the trial, and these days, visitors usually meant neighbors or friends. Concepts Travis was still getting used to. The riders turned out to be the Hendersons from the neighboring ranch, bringing their children for Maggie's weekly school session. Word had spread about the widow who could read and write and cipher. And now, every Saturday, their yard filled with children eager to learn. Mrs. McLean, young Sarah Henderson called out, jumping down from her pony. I practiced my letters all week. That's wonderful. Sarah, go on inside and set up the slates. I'll be there shortly. Travis watched his wife with the children, saw how she lit up when teaching them. The doctor had been right. There would be no babies of their own. But Maggie had found other ways to nurture, other lives to shape. Mr. McLean, Robert Henderson said, dismounting. Heard you might be looking for extra hands for the cattle drive. Might be. Travis allowed. The herd had grown to nearly 200 head. Too many for one man to handle alone. My oldest boy, James, he's 16 now. Good with horses. Steady hand. He could use the work. Travis studied the boy, tall for his age, serious-faced. Reminded him a bit of himself at that age. Can you start Monday? The boy's face lit up. Yes, sir. As the morning progressed, more families arrived. The Clarks, the Millers, even old Walt Jameson, who claimed he was too old to learn letters but came anyway for Maggie's coffee and conversation. Travis found himself in the barn with several of the men, discussing water rights and grazing patterns, the price of beef in Tucson. Conversation that once would have sent him hiding now felt natural, even welcome. "Never thought I'd see the day," Walt said, grinning. Travis McLean hosting a social. "It's not a social," Travis protested. "It's a school." "Sure it is." Walt winked. "And that smile on your face has nothing to do with that pretty wife of yours." Travis couldn't argue with that. Later, after the lessons were done and the families had shared a midday meal, after the last wagon had rolled away with promises to return next week, Travis found Maggie sitting on their new porch swing, looking tired but content. "Good day?" he asked, settling beside her. "The best. Little Tommy Miller wrote his name for the first time, and Sarah Henderson read an entire page without help. You're building something important here." "We are," she corrected. "None of this would be possible without you. I just built the porch. You built more than that." She took his hand, tracing the calluses. "You built a place where people feel welcome, where children can learn, where a broken woman could heal. We healed each other." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun begin its descent toward the western mountains. The ranch spread before them, the expanded cabin, the improved barn, the garden heavy with vegetables, the corral full of healthy horses. But more than the physical improvements, there was life here now. Laughter. Hope. "I have something to tell you," Maggie said eventually. Travis looked at her, noting the slight nervousness in her voice. "What is it?" "Doc Morrison was out yesterday while you were with the herd. He thinks he might have been wrong about my injuries, about children." Travis's heart stopped. "What?" "He's not certain, and it would be risky. But he said there's a chance, a small one. But still, Maggie." Travis turned to face her fully. "Are you? I don't know. Maybe. It's too early to be sure. But I've been sick in the mornings, and tired, and..." She placed his hand on her still flat stomach. "I'm late, Travis. 2 months late." The world seemed to stop. Travis stared at his hand on her belly, afraid to hope, afraid to breathe. "It might be nothing," Maggie said quickly. "Doc said not to get our hopes up, but..." Travis silenced her with a kiss, pouring all his joy and fear and love into the contact. When they broke apart, they were both crying. "A baby," he whispered. "Maybe, if God wills it. If it's a boy, we could name him after one of the men from your unit," Maggie suggested. "To honor them." Travis swallowed hard. "And if it's a girl?" "Then we name her Hope, because that's what she'll be." They stayed on the porch as evening fell, planning tentatively, dreaming carefully. The desert around them came alive with night sounds, coyotes calling, owls hunting, the endless whisper of wind through rock. Inside the cabin, the table was still scattered with school supplies, evidence of the day's learning. On the mantel sat a photograph from their wedding day, Travis looking stunned but determined, Maggie radiant despite everything they'd faced. "Do you ever regret it?" Travis asked suddenly. "Coming here that day? Staying despite everything?" Maggie was quiet for a moment, considering. "Sam used to tell me I was worthless, that no decent man would want a woman like me. For the longest time, I believed him. Maggie, let me finish." She squeezed his hand. "Then I came here, and you were so angry, so closed off. But even then, you treated me with more respect than Sam ever did. You saw me as a person, not property. And when you finally let me see past your walls," she smiled, "I found a man worth fighting for, worth staying for. So no, Travis, I don't regret a single moment. Not even the hard parts, the trial, the gossip. Especially not those. They showed me how strong we could be together." As full dark settled over the desert, they made their way inside. The cabin that had once been a cold refuge for a bitter man was now a home filled with warmth and possibility. Travis paused in the doorway, looking back at the land he'd nearly lost, the life he'd nearly thrown away. 5 years ago, he'd come here to hide from the world, to nurse his wounds in solitude. Instead, he'd found redemption in the most unexpected place, in the courage of a woman who'd suffered far worse than he had but refused to let it break her spirit. Coming to bed, Maggie called from their room. In a moment, he stood there a bit longer, remembering the day she'd arrived in the dust storm, their first meal together, the night she'd kissed his scars and told him no man deserved to be so lonely, the morning he'd nearly let her leave, the afternoon he'd fought to get her back. Each memory was a stepping stone on the path that had led them here, to this moment, to this life they'd built together. "Travis? I'm coming." He closed the door on the night, on the past, on all the lonely years. Inside was warmth and light, and the woman who'd taught him that sometimes the most dangerous thing wasn't letting someone in, it was keeping them out. As he joined Maggie in their bed, Travis placed his hand once more on her stomach, hoping against hope that new life grew there. But even if it didn't, even if they faced more disappointments, more struggles, he knew they'd face them together. "I love you," he whispered in the darkness. "And I love you," she whispered back. Outside, the desert wind sang its ancient song through the rocks, but inside the cabin that love had transformed into a home. Two people who'd found each other against all odds held tight to their hard-won happiness. The scars remained. They always would. But as Maggie had told him that first night, they weren't marks of failure. They were proof of survival. Proof that broken things could heal, that closed hearts could open, that even in the harsh beauty of the Arizona desert, love could bloom as unexpectedly as wildflowers after rain. And in the quiet of their room, with the vast wilderness stretching endlessly beyond their walls, Travis McLean finally understood that being alone had never kept him safe. It had only kept him from living. But here, now, with Maggie in his arms and hope growing beneath her heart, he was no longer just surviving. He was home. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope Travis and Maggie's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine while sharing it. Where are you listening to this story from? Please leave a comment below. I'd love to connect with listeners from around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel for more authentic frontier tales of love, redemption, and the untamed American spirit. Share your thoughts about Travis and Maggie's story in the comments. Did their love give you hope? Until our next adventure in the Wild West, partners,